Before 2023, how many times has the President of the United States been indicted?
None.
Before 2023, how many times has a former President of the United States been indicted?
None.
In the last 2 years, how many times has President Donald J. Trump been indicted?
Okay, so you just saw that clip. And whether you love Ted Cruz or you can't stand him, you have to admit what he just laid out there is worth talking about. Because this isn't really about Donald Trump. This isn't even really about Ted Cruz. This is about a question that goes to the heart of how this republic is supposed to work. Can you use the justice system as a political weapon? And if you can, what does that mean for the rest of us? Cruz walked in with receipts. FDR. Truman. Obama. He didn't make abstract legal arguments, he put names and numbers on the table. 140,000 people killed by Truman's bombs. American citizens killed by Obama's drones without due process. And his point was simple. None of those presidents were ever indicted. Not one. So before we get into the full reaction, I want to ask you something. If you believe the law should apply the same way regardless of who's in power, this video is for you. Hit subscribe because this channel is where we have the conversations other people are too afraid to have. Drop a comment below and tell me where you stand before we even get into it. All right, let's watch the whole thing and then I'll break it all down.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The nub of the Democrats' argument today is that the concept of presidential immunity is somehow unprecedented, is somehow remarkable. That claim is utterly ahistorical and disconnected from the entire constitutional history of the Republic. General Mukasey, before 2023, how many times has the President of the United States been indicted?
None.
Before 2023, how many times has a former President of the United States been indicted?
None.
In the last 2 years, how many times has President Donald J. Trump been indicted?
4 times, I believe.
Now, many presidents of both parties have engaged in controversial actions, and yet none of them have been indicted. Let me ask you, General Mukasey, if a private citizen were to erect an internment camp and to forcibly kidnap American citizens, to single them out because of race, and to imprison them based on their race, would that private citizen be subject to criminal prosecution?
Would.
When President Franklin Delano Roosevelt did the exact same thing and erected Japanese internment camps, was FDR prosecuted?
He was not.
Let me ask you, similarly, if a private citizen were, say, to detonate a nuclear weapon over a city and kill over 140,000 people, and then if that private citizen a few days later detonated another nuclear bomb over another city and killed 75,000 people, could that private citizen be criminally prosecuted?
He would.
Was President Harry Truman prosecuted for detonating nuclear weapons over Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
He was not.
All right, how about this? If a private citizen launched a weaponized drone and killed a United States citizen, could that private citizen be criminally prosecuted?
He would.
Was President Barack Obama criminally prosecuted when he killed United States citizens using drones without notice and without due process?
He was not. Although, as far as due process is concerned, I believe the comment of my successor to that question was that Anwar al-Awlaki got, quote, all the process that was necessary.
Well, although I suspect he might disagree with that assessment were he able to present his case.
Right.
All right. Let's contrast that with the rules that govern other federal officials. You were a judge for 19 years. As a federal judge, did you have immunity from your official acts?
For my official act, yes.
Do federal prosecutors have immunity from their official acts?
They do.
Now, the distinction between official acts and personal acts is not a terribly shocking distinction. Under the decision of Trump versus United States, if any president walks onto the sidewalk and just shoots a citizen, is that president liable to be prosecuted?
He is.
How about this? If a president steals funds from his campaign, does that president face criminal liability?
He does.
How about this? If a president sexually assaults, let's say, an intern in the Oval Office, is the president subject to criminal prosecution for that?
He could be.
So that distinction, again, is not a shocking distinction. The Founding Fathers vested the executive power in a single president of the United States. What we have seen in the last 2 years is we have seen Democrats deliberately weaponizing the Department of Justice and our legal system to target their political opposition. It is not an accident that every indictment against President Trump was brought by a Democrat and was brought after he announced his campaign for President of the United States. Understand, the target of those indictments was not ultimately President Trump, it was the voters. It was prosecutors who were terrified that the voters would choose to re-elect President Trump. One of the great things about the United States is we're not a banana republic. Since 2000, the nation of Pakistan has had 6 former prime ministers prosecuted and convicted. Brazil has had 3 former presidents arrested and imprisoned. Last year, Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega arrested, charged, and imprisoned 40 political opponents. General Mukasey, you were Attorney General of the United States. Is it the proper role of the Department of Justice to prosecute and target the political opponents of whoever happens to be President of the United States?
It is most assuredly not.
Thank you.
Senator Bowman.
All right, so we just watched the whole thing, and I want to be straight with you. I think Ted Cruz just made one of the most legally coherent and historically grounded arguments I have heard in a congressional hearing in a long time. Let's start with the fact he opened on. Before 2023, no president in the entire history of this republic had ever been indicted. Not once. Not George W. Bush over the Iraq War. Not Bill Clinton. Not Nixon, who resigned specifically to avoid that process. That is not a talking point. That is just history. And when something has never happened in over 230 years and then suddenly happens 4 times in 2 years to the same man who also happens to be the frontrunner against the sitting president, you have to at least ask the question. Cruz asked it, and it deserved to be asked. Now the examples he used: FDR, Truman, Obama. I know some people will push back on those, and honestly, fair enough. The Japanese internment camps were a national disgrace. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are among the most morally debated decisions in modern history. Obama's drone strike on Anwar al-Awlaki, an American citizen killed without trial, had civil liberties advocates on the left furious at the time. But here's Cruz's point, and it's one you cannot just dismiss. None of them were prosecuted. And if you're going to build a legal framework where a former president can be prosecuted for official acts, you have to reckon with what that framework means going forward. Because the precedent you set today will be used by the next administration against the one after it. That is not a conservative argument or a liberal argument. That is just logic. Then he makes a point I thought was really sharp. He establishes that other federal officials already have immunity for their official acts. Federal judges. Federal prosecutors. The very people who would bring cases against a president are themselves shielded from prosecution for their own official conduct. His witness, a man who served as a federal judge for 19 years, confirmed it directly. So why would the president, the single head of the executive branch carrying the greatest official responsibility in government, be the one person without that protection? And before anyone says he is just trying to protect Trump, Cruz actually addressed that head-on. Under the Trump versus United States ruling, a president who shoots someone on a sidewalk can be prosecuted. A president who steals from his campaign can be prosecuted. A president who commits sexual assault can be prosecuted. The immunity covers official acts, not personal conduct. That is a distinction a lot of media coverage has deliberately blurred, and Cruz called it out clearly. Now, the most politically explosive part. Every single indictment against Donald Trump was brought by a Democrat, and every single one came after Trump announced he was running for president again. I am not saying that automatically makes the indictments wrong on the legal merits, but the pattern should make any intellectually honest person uncomfortable. Because if a Republican DOJ were indicting a Democratic former president 4 times in an election year, we all know what that conversation would look like right now. And his closing point is honestly the most important thing he said. He did not frame this as Republicans versus Democrats. He framed it as America versus banana republics. Pakistan has had 6 former prime ministers prosecuted and convicted. Brazil imprisoned 3 former presidents. Nicaragua arrested 40 political opponents in a single year. His argument is that the moment you normalize using criminal prosecution as a tool of political competition, you have crossed a line that is very hard to come back from. And I think he is right about that. You can disagree with Ted Cruz on 100 different issues. But on this specific question, on the danger of a justice system that targets political opponents, he made the argument clearly, he backed it with history, and it deserves a serious response rather than just a partisan one. So that is my take. What is yours? Drop it in the comments. Let's have this conversation like adults. That is what this channel is about. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. See you in the next one.